Hey y'all, so Dark Side of the Ring, David Schultz is in the books, and we're gonna just go through the 2020 segment. I think this might be a fun way to discuss this subject. It's just by going through the 2020 subject as it happened, and I'm going to pause it, of course, to talk about different things and anything that's not in here. We're just gonna put it in somewhere later. So I'm figuring this out on the fly. So let's just make this one fun and watch the entire situation as it unfolded, because the Dark Side of the Ring didn't really go through the episode completely. It just followed the characters that they wanted to follow, which was David Schultz, Eddie Mansfield, and John Stossel himself. But there are other people in this documentary, in this show, that so it's for some people who have never seen it before. So it might be cool for people who never seen it before. And if you want to watch it without my commentary, you could. I'm just going to put it in the description, at least the channel where I found it. So let's go through this.
Chance to join it.
This is the ex-wrestler Eddie Mansfield.
Is this real wrestling?
No, it's not real. No, not at all. I mean, if somebody believed that, they'd be stupid.
Eddie Mansfield, with longer hair, was a professional wrestler for 6 years. For a while, he was Florida TV champion. He was a 230-pound bad guy. Mansfield wrestled hundreds of matches, mostly in California, Texas, and Georgia. He says not one match was for real.
All right, so Eddie Mansfield, if we just figured out, if we just said, he was actually in a documentary in the Dark Side of the Ring. He claims his reasoning for exposing the business was he did it for the boys. You know, he did it for the boys. He did it so the boys can get health insurance and pensions, and you know, the promoters mistreat wrestlers and all this type of stuff. Of course, I was able to piece together through various interviews that I looked at. I honestly did not sit down and listen to this motherfucker talk. I just read some transcripts, and it seems like his biggest issue was with Ole Anderson. This was not mentioned in the Dark Side of the Ring. The name Ole Anderson did not come up. Of course, there was a ton of Vince McMahon in there, but you would think that nobody else existed at this time. But Eddie Mansfield was working somewhere else. He was not working in the WWF when he did this. And he claimed that the bookers wanted to take 20% of his money. And he claimed that, you know, the bookers wanted 20% kickback and all that type of stuff. And certain guys were willing to pay it, and he wasn't. So he, you know, out of love for the boys, he decided to go call ABC and get pushed into doing this expose. Look, we know it's bullshit, right? Anybody who say, like, just about anybody who could tell you, if you say you did it for the boys, it's bullshit. These guys, I mean, especially, we can talk about this later, in a later part, or in a different video. But these guys are very well taken care of. This, no pensions, no health care. I mean, anybody who says that, just, you know, they're just an asshole. Eddie Mansfield was bitter, and he still is, about his position in the business. And this is kind of what people who know him and who have followed his career understand, that he's basically just full of shit. And he exposed the business because he was mad at certain people. But from interviews I was able to put together, it was actually Ole Anderson that he was actually upset about, and not Vince McMahon. So let's continue.
Motor comes in and says, hey, I want it done this way.
Eddie said he'd teach me how they fake it if I'd go in the ring with him. So I did.
You know a little amateur wrestling. Give me.
All right, so John Stossel, for people who don't know, is a reporter for ABC. He was a reporter for ABC. He's freelance now. He kind of works for, well, he does a little bit of stuff for Reason. He's a libertarian. I'm a libertarian, so I know who John Stossel is. I'm familiar with his work. John Stossel was in the Dark Side of the Ring documentary. He said that he was a amateur wrestler, that he was a high school wrestler, and he said he liked pro wrestling as a kid, but he kind of grew out of it and started to think that it was just bullshit, or he called athletic bullshit, and that it just wasn't interesting and it wasn't fun or whatever. And he said he did a poll, and a third of the people, which is 30%, about 33%, thought that wrestling was real. And then that's what made him just decide to do this expose, is that pro wrestling is bullshit, it's athletic bullshit. But essentially, John Stossel was a muckraker. He's just a quote-unquote investigative reporter. But he does these these things to aggravate people. That's just his job. So, but he has a wrestling background. He's a high school wrestler. So, and he claims that this is, it offended him that people thought pro wrestling was real and that people should know that it's not real. So that's why he decided to do this expose. And now, Eddie Mansfield, is going to show him how wrestling is done.
I couldn't believe it. I hardly done anything to him, and he flies across the room. You just take off on your own.
Right. All right, give me another one. In the ring, this is the way I would do it in front of people. Okay? Go ahead.
As I lift, he jumps. This move has never worked so well. You're landing on your feet. It doesn't hurt. Right.
So, of course, Eddie Mansfield is breaking kayfabe. And they talked about kayfabe kind of as two different things. One, they said it was like a secret society, like a fraternity, which I can completely understand. The second, someone says that kayfabe to David Schultz, who doesn't come into this documentary until much later. This ABC piece, he doesn't actually come in until much later. But it's actually he said it was a religion, and that Schultz was kind of, as all older wrestlers were kind of, this was kind of drilled into them that you have to protect the business. But this documentary, I think, is actually very interesting. So let's keep going.
What about the bigger move, the famous body slam? That's a real crowd pleaser. Eddie says the guy getting slammed is the key. He has to help the other wrestler by jumping. If you watch, you can see it here. Of course, it's easy for 200-pound Eddie to body slam me. But Eddie says anybody can do it. And after 10 minutes of his teaching...
Think you can do it quick?
I don't know.
Try it.
He did half the work. You're doing the lifting.
Right, you just turn it.
What about getting your head smashed into the turnbuckle? That looks painful.
You can see that this guy is...
Eddie says it isn't. The turnbuckle's padded.
What does any of this have to do with what he claims is health insurance and all that type of stuff? Because if you're telling everybody that it's fake, then what the fuck do they need health insurance for? They're not getting hurt, right?
Yeah.
So you're telling people that it's not real. At the same time, you're claiming that you're doing this for health insurance and stuff like this. It doesn't make any sense.
What about hitting? They're always hitting each other.
You can do that a lot of ways.
You're just stamping your foot, pretending to hit me like that.
That way. Okay.
And when I do it to him, even though I'm not nearly as good at it, it looks even more authentic because he's acting.
That's a better punch than I've seen live.
You can see it in this match when we slow down the action.
Is that big move?
Each punch is pulled. Never touched him. Here's a real crowd pleaser. Stand up on the rope and jump. It's all fake, says Eddie.
Nobody throws a full haymaker. Like
I'm a very
that's the reason they
trusting
count
person
power punches in boxing.
He lands on his
Because
forearms
most
and
people do
elbows,
not
not
throw
on me.
punches with full power. It just doesn't make sense.
After a half hour's training, Eddie says, I'm ready for a series of moves. That's the way they do it in a match. Do a fireman's carry, 2 tackles, and a body slam, he says.
You like you mean business. You mean it nasty. Shoot out!
Holy shit. That's amazing.
When a real wrestler does it with him, it's much more believable. This is Jim Wilson, former All-America football player from the University of Georgia. Does all this look real to you? Well, listen to Jim.
Are the matches fixed? Every one of them's predetermined.
Okay.
Predetermined. Fixed. Predetermined. They decide who, when, where, what, why, how much, and how long.
What about all the blood?
See, this guy
There's plenty of
knows.
blood
Okay,
in
this part is
professional
very
wrestling.
interesting,
Is that fake too?
We're going to get into
It's
the
not, says Eddie. The promoters want real blood. He says there's an expression for it. Red turns to green.
Red turns to green means when you get blood, that turns into money.
Real blood?
Real blood. There's no such thing as a blood capsule.
He showed us.
Okay, so a lot of people, Jim Cornette was especially mad about the blading. The blading issue is kind of, to me, if you're saying that it's not real, does it really matter? whether the blade is real or not. I get a lot of people, they kind of want to avoid the subject of blading, but Eddie Mansfield claims that he was pushed by the ABC producers into showing them about the blades, and that he wasn't interested in showing about blading, and that he wanted to quote unquote help the business and all this kind of shit. And he didn't want to do this, but he was pushed into it by John Stossel and all these guys. And this is what he gets bitter at ABC about, that he was pushed into showing them about blading, because wrestling had been exposed in the 1930s, as far as Jim Cornette said in the Dark Side of the Ring documentary, that the business had been exposed already, kind of. But these exposés, I guess they have to be pretty regular because new generations of people are born. And I remember seeing the wrestlers, who exposed the business in the late 90s. I'm pretty sure. I don't remember what show that was. I think it was on Fox or something like that. But there was a lot of wrestlers in masks. I think one of them might have been Greg Valentine. I hope not. But that was at the height of wrestling too. So whenever like wrestling gets at its highest point, there certain people who are not involved, like Eddie Mansfield or the guys who were in the masked guys in the Fox, when they were doing all the magician, you guys probably remember when Fox was doing all these magicians, exposing the magician secrets and stuff like that. They did a wrestling one too. And there was a lot of guys, mostly no-name guys, who weren't in the business anymore. They had a hard time making money. And so they got paid to do an expose. And this was at the height of like the Attitude Era. So, but no matter how many times they expose the business, it just keeps coming back. So that should tell you about the strength of wrestling. Is no matter how many Meltzers and Alvarez's and all these guys, no matter any Eddie Mansfields and all these other dudes who just keep popping up out of nowhere, doing these quote unquote exposés, telling people that certain stuff is not real and blah, 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 blah. It doesn't really it hurts the business overall because there's so much material now. And then now when you have podcasts and all this type of stuff, everybody knows that, but now you kind of have to ask the question of whether some of these shoot interviews are real, because sometimes I just get a sense that even in shoot interviews that there is bullshit, and that's why I kind of stopped watching them, I just kind of felt like people were making shit up as they go along. Like we know Hulk Hogan does it. Like we know Hulk Hogan makes up shit.
How it's done. He takes a double-edged razor and cuts it up so it's only 1/8 of an inch wide. Then he wraps it in tape and hides it in the tape on his wrist.
Some keep the blade right here, in their mouth, some in their tights, some on their finger.
In the middle of a match, or sometimes it's when a wrestler is thrown out of the ring, Eddie says he'll pull out the razor blade and cut himself on the forehead. He says they do it themselves because they don't trust the opponent to do it carefully enough. And if you look at many wrestlers' foreheads, you can see the scar tissue. Eddie volunteered to show us how he did it.
Well, you take it out like that. You go just like that.
How does this help the business? That's what I want to know.
And then gradually during the match, it would drip around over your face.
That's it. See, if I was sweating, it'd pour.
Who are these promoters who, according to Eddie and other wrestlers, tell people to bleed and fix the matches? Well, there are several, each working different parts of the country. But the biggest promoter is the man in the vest, Vince McMahon. Now, we have no proof that he personally has done any of these things. He denies even knowing about the razor blade business. And he denies that he fixes matches. Though this night, when his cable TV show was running late...
Okay, so it was mentioned in the Dark Side of the Ring, and it should be mentioned here, that Vince McMahon exposed the business, I guess, the next year, where he went to the athletic commissions and decided and created sports entertainment, which is legalese for wrestling is not a sport. It is a show like Broadway. And he did that to get out of paying all of these costs and these regulations that go along with with sports. And it was fucking brilliant. It was fucking brilliant. And then, it made sense to do it, not only at the time because the expose, the 2020 expose had already taken place. And, most of the people who were still watching it, because this was right after WrestleMania, I guess. And it was still a popular show. Like, people didn't care that it wasn't real. That a lot of people didn't care that it wasn't real. So Vince McMahon, of course, exposed the business the next year. And I think it was 1985 when he decided to do that. I might want to do a video on, but Nah, I'm probably not going to do a video on that. Well, actually, y'all let me know if y'all interested in looking at how Vince McMahon argued that wrestling should not be under athletic commissions. That's a pretty good libertarian thing because we hate regulations. So this is me really kind of clapping for Vince McMahon in this situation because I love that he found a way to beat the government out of money. That was beautiful.
We overheard him tell these wrestlers that time was running out. They'd have to make their match quick. And as you can see, they do. This exhibition lasted exactly 22 seconds. The good guy didn't even have time to take his jacket off. This year, 10 million Americans will pay to attend exhibitions like this one. Millions more will watch Vince McMahon's national cable TV show.
It's growing by leaps and bounds of popularity. It's just overwhelming.
And you're the biggest promoter?
By far, yes. We enjoy that privilege.
Is it a legitimate sport?
It's not perhaps a legitimate sport in terms of what someone would think of in a traditional way.
Oh, wait a minute.
I would say
Wait a minute. What did the warlord just say?
The popularity, it's just overwhelming.
And you're the biggest promoter?
By far, yes. We enjoy that privilege.
Is it a legitimate sport?
It's not perhaps a legitimate sport in terms of what someone would think of in a traditional way. I would say professional wrestling and the World Wrestling Federation is a most unique category.
What is it if it's not a sport?
I don't know.
He hadn't come up with sports entertainment yet, but he admitted right there essentially that it's not a legitimate sport. So the expose didn't bother Vince, and Cornette said something that was really interesting, that when you expose the business, you're not harming the promoters, you're harming the boys. This is why at the Eddie Mansfield "I did it for the boys" is bullshit, because even if the promoters go out of business, the boys are the ones who have to go out, have to go out and find jobs, right? The promoters are usually rich; they can afford to pay talent. This is typical of people who try to push bottom up responses to things, or labor friendly policies, like Mansfield and all of the socialists and all these union workers and all that type of shit. They don't understand. The boss is the boss for a reason, right? Like, this guy has money. So if, like, when you go on strike, you're not really hurting your boss. Your boss still has his own money. You're just really robbing yourself of money. If you don't work, you don't get paid. So, that's why you have a lot of people who try to have like these funds when these organizations go on strike. They try to have people, they try to have restaurants donate food, or churches donate money, because the workers are hurting themselves. It's like if you were in prison and you go on and you refuse to eat. I forget what I can't think of it. Well, it's like self-imposed starvation. You're not hurting the warden by refusing to eat. You're hurting yourself. And these labor arguments really just hurt themselves, because people have become fabulously wealthy in wrestling. There's too many people who have become absolutely fabulously wealthy wrestling for you to continue to make the same bullshit arguments about unions and pensions and a bunch of other shit, because those same people would drink away a pension if they drunk away all the money they made in Madison Square Garden. It's just kind of how it is. If they were a basketball player and they, had a bunch of babies out of wedlock, they do the same thing. So that argument really just doesn't work. It's all about certain people who do not know how to spend money and do not know how to use money. They will always be underpaid because their spending is greater than the money that they make. So if you increase their money, they'll just increase their spending. That's just kind of how they did. That's kind of how it works. But back to this subject, Vince McMahon essentially says here that wrestling is not real. Okay, it's not a legitimate sport. So he tells John Stossel this. So ultimately, the 1985 exposing the business, Vince McMahon exposes the business. And that's why I really wanted to go through this documentary, is because a lot of people have never seen it. They don't know what's in it. And they think that, it was all about David Schultz slapping somebody. No, it was just a complete expose on the business.
Now you might say, so what if it's fixed? These are still great actors and superb athletes, working hard to put on a good show night after night. Well, the problem is that many ex-wrestlers say this is a mean, dirty business.
They ruined my career, and I'm 28 years old, and it's not like I'm over the hill. And the promoters are very ruthless people, and they don't take care of the people that make them the money.
Eddie says that when he talked publicly about wrestlers being treated as slaves with no medical benefits and no pensions, the promoters got together and blacklisted him. Now, it's legal to fire someone who...
Okay, so understand, he claims he was blackballed before he did the expose. Often when you hear people talk about this, like if you listen to people, especially in the dark side of the ring, they make it seem like Eddie Mansfield came out of nowhere, did this expose, and then was blackballed for doing the expose, when honestly he was blackballed before this. So in other words, he didn't do it for the boys. He did it because he was bitter at the promoters for not hiring him, which is what, kind of what Jim Cornette has been saying. I hate that I have to agree with Jim Cornette so much. They make it seem like I'm just a Cornette guy, but I disagree with Cornette a lot. But he was right on this, and I really don't like this argument that people are treated like slaves. I mean, you're not a slave if you can walk away. And as an independent contractor, you don't even have to answer the phone. People aren't looking for you. So what? You go do something else. This idea that we're going to try to equate everything to slavery, I find it to be, especially as a black man, I find that shit to be quite offensive. But let's keep going.
Complain. But it's not legal if all the employers band together to make sure someone they don't like can't work anywhere. That's what's happening in pro wrestling, according to many wrestlers.
It's closed shop, John. Totally closed and controlled. It's the only business in this country today that is an illegal monopoly being allowed to exist.
And what happened to you?
Basically, I didn't go to bed with a homosexual promoter, and they picked up the phone, and I was blackballed. I was put...
Okay, so for starters, it's not a monopoly. There are too many promotions that exist for it to be a monopoly. There's just too many. And it's said earlier, John Stossel even says it earlier, that there is multiple promotions, but the WWF is the biggest one. Now, this gentleman, I'm not sure who he's talking about, but it might be Nick Goulas. I think Nick Goulas is the gay promoter. Hopefully I don't remember, but it might be somebody else, but I think it's Nick Goulas. But you notice that they're not mentioning names here. Vince McMahon's face is all over this motherfucker, but all the other promoters are essentially invisible.
Out of the business, I lost my home, a $650,000 home here in Atlanta, Georgia.
He said, sleep with me, I'll make you champion.
That's right.
But you didn't, and so you're out.
I'm out.
Some promote...
Wait a minute. This guy had a $650,000 house? Is that what he said? But we're supposed to believe that this guy... This is in 1984, by the way. He had a $650,000 house in 1984? From pro wrestling? I'm supposed to get upset because these guys don't have health insurance? Come on, let's listen to that again.
Basically, I didn't go to bed with a homosexual promoter, and they picked up the phone, and I was blackballed. I was put out of the business. I lost my home, a $650,000 home here in Atlanta, Georgia.
He said, sleep with me, I'll make you champion.
$650,000.
But you didn't, and so you're out.
And I have no idea who this guy is.
Some promoters also say there's a monopoly. Ann Gunkel's a wrestling promoter in Atlanta.
And I got shut out in San Diego not too long ago because they said they only wanted to rent to one wrestling promoter.
Does this sound like a monopoly? Georgia.
Okay, so a promoter tries to go from one territory to another. That territory is pretty much all sewn up. So they says, no, we don't want to do business with anyone else, which I guess is it's the business of the people who are operating out there. So if you're trying to work it with the arenas and all that type of stuff, and the arenas are like, no, like Coke and Pepsi kind of have this kind of thing. Like if you go to a restaurant, right, and you'll say, what do you have? They'll say Coke products. That means they don't sell Pepsi products, right? So is that a monopoly? That if you go to a restaurant and they have, Sprite, oh my God, I have no idea what Coke products are. I know Sprite is one of them. I think Squirt is another one. If they have like Sprite and Squirt and Coca-Cola and vanilla Coke and all that, but they have no Pepsi, is that considered a monopoly? The answer is no. If you want Coke products, you can just go to the goddamn gas station across the street.
State Representative Dick Lane thinks so. His committee recently held hearings on professional wrestling, and he's trying to come up with legislation to make these exclusive deals illegal.
It's just not the American way. It's not the free enterprise system.
So it's a private club, and they just keep other people out.
It's a private club, that's correct.
Now, none of these charges were leveled directly at Vince McMahon, but we wondered how the biggest promoter would react to all this.
They say you've got it tied up.
I would say, generally speaking, that most of that is really sour grapes. Certainly something like that would never happen in the World Wrestling Federation, I assure you.
Other promoters we talked to also deny those.
Bullshit. Oh my God. Bullshit. Come on, Vince. This is bullshit.
Charges were leveled directly at Vince McMahon, but we wondered how the biggest promoter would react to all this.
They say you've got it tied up.
I would say, generally speaking, that most of that is really sour grapes. Certainly something like that would never happen in the World Wrestling Federation, I assure you.
Other promoters we talked to also deny those charges. There's one last point I'd like to bring up.
Holy shit.
Independent of whether wrestling is a monopoly, of the fact that the matches are fixed, of whether wrestlers are blackballed, what do these shows do to the people who participate in them and who watch them? It is a great show, but does it encourage violence? Some psychologists told us they think it does. And the fans do frequently get violent. Sometimes the police have to throw them out. Maybe fake violence breeds real violence, and not just among the fans. It seems to egg on bullies like 6'6", 260.
Okay, so let's talk about this question that he just brought up. Does wrestling encourage violence? Come on, John Stossel. You're a fucking libertarian. I don't know if he was a libertarian at the point. Maybe he was just a regular ass Republican or whatever. Or maybe he was a leftist. Who knows? You know, things change in 30 years. But the idea that media causes violence, I mean, we've had that argument 100 fucking times. Like, yes, wrestling lends itself to being mimicked. You know, we've seen like the little kid in the late 90s, a little kid killed his little sister or something like that with a rock bottom or whatever. So you started having these WWF don't try this at home things. And, you know I was a kid putting DDT in and powerbombing my brothers, but it wasn't wrestling made me do it. It was just cool shit. Like, you know, you mimic things that you see on TV, you know, and it doesn't matter what you put on TV. You know, you play Cowboys and Indians because you may just saw it on TV or whatever. But that doesn't mean that it's quote unquote real violence. I don't know. That's kids playing around. Now, does it lend itself to people? People get rowdy because they're very emotional. Just like at a sports game where you see soccer, which is not a violent sport at all, and you see people flipping over cars or setting shit on fire. March Madness is another one where you will have large groups of people burning shit down because they won or lost a game. I mean, these kind of things are routine. But now we're getting into David Schultz. So let's show what happens, and then we're going to talk about David Schultz.
Found Dave Schultz. He used to be tag team partner of Eddie Mansfield, a wrestler who's just told us how every match is fake. I asked Schultz questions that I assume all wrestlers have been asked dozens of times.
What? Is this a good business? Yeah, it's a good business. I wouldn't be in it if it wasn't.
Why is it a good business?
Because only the tough survive. That's the reason you ain't in it. And this punk holding the camera reading he ain't in it. Reading these rednecks out here ain't in it because it's a tough business.
Okay.
That's terrific.
What, is that all you got?
I'll ask you the standard question. You know,
Standard question.
I think this is fake.
You think it's fake?
Oh, shit.
What's that? Is that fake? Huh? What the hell's wrong with you? That's open hand slap, huh? You think it's fake?
Oh.
Huh?
Oh, okay. Okay. Woo! Shit. Okay. Let me get this out the way first. Okay. Physical assault is wrong. I do not condone physical assault. Yes, John Stossel instigated, and I believe that he did instigate this. But there's a lot of stuff about this situation that I don't like. Okay, so let's talk about before we get to talking about Schultz himself. Let's talk about this incident. Okay, so this is how the incident. Schultz has been remarkably. I looked at a couple of different interviews that he actually did over the years, and he's been pretty consistent that when Stossel wanted to come to MSG to do this interview with the WWF, Vince McMahon gave him access to the locker room, which Schultz did not appreciate. He did not like that that John Stossel and ABC and all these guys were going to be in the locker room. And he felt like the locker room was for the boys. Again, kayfabe is a religion for David Schultz. David Schultz says that Vince McMahon told him to be in character. Okay? And now this is where things get fuzzy. Because first Schultz says that Vince McMahon told him to smack John Stossel. Then I see that he says in the Dark Side of the Ring that Vince McMahon told him to be in character. And he says the character of Dr. D would slap somebody who said that this was fake. So that's why he slapped him. And he also said he slapped him for being rude, which, I mean, people get slapped for being rude. It happens. But the idea that Vince McMahon put him up to it doesn't seem to make much sense, especially since, coming out of this, Stossel sued, of course. He did not sue David Schultz. He sued the WWF. And he says in the documentary that he won $280,000, so about $300,000. I've seen somewhere that it was about 400, so maybe the 280 is what he got out of the 400, because he had legal costs and all that type of stuff. But the slaps, why did David Schultz slap him? Now, you can just say that David Schultz is an ornery dude, and he's just, riled up and all that type of stuff, and it's entirely possible he just lost his mind. But, the idea that Mr. Man put him up to it seems really, really fishy to me. It's just, look, in order to believe that Vince McMahon put David Schultz up to this, you have to believe that Vince McMahon wanted to get sued or arrested, or wanted him to get arrested, right? So if you're David Schultz and you're in this situation, if you assault this guy, you're probably going to get arrested, right? That's the first thing that should be right in your mind, because you're talking about a guy who is not in the business. If you put your hands on him, the 10 times out of 10, you're going to go to jail. Now, he didn't go to jail here, but he did, Luke, get suspended and get, we can go through an article in a moment that talks about, his suspension and all that type of stuff. And it kind of gives a little bit of background on this, but you would have to believe that Vince McMahon wanted to get sued. Okay. And that's the first thing you have to ask. And when somebody says, "Oh, Vince McMahon put him up to it," you think Vince wanted to lose $300,000? You think he just had $300,000 and said, "Fuck it, I'm going to throw this money at John Stossel for no fucking good reason"? And who knows how much it really would have cost? He didn't know it was going to cost $300,000. It could have cost him more. And the idea that, well, the WWF just likes getting sued doesn't make any sense. And the fact that the point of profit is to keep it, not to give it to motherfuckers who weasel themselves into the locker room and get hurt. That's not the point of lawsuits. That's not the point of being in business. So I can pretty much eliminate, just through basic logic, that Vince McMahon put him up to this. But he has said over the years that Vince McMahon put him up to it, or put him in this position by letting John Stossel be in this interview. But none of it makes any sense. It's just him not taking responsibility for losing control of himself. But ultimately, this was a very expensive slap for Vince McMahon. And Vince McMahon would also, and he mentioned in the Dark Side of the Ring, he also ended up paying a lawsuit for Hulk Hogan, who choked out Richard Belzer, who I think he was on Law and Order SVU. He was Munch on Law and Order SVU. I don't remember what he did before that. I'm trying to remember. For some reason, I keep thinking he's Spock, but I'm pretty sure he's not Spock. That's Leonard Nimoy. I don't know why I keep getting, maybe because they're just two weird looking Jews. But anyway, the story goes that, Vince McMahon told them to do the interview, and to do the interview in character and to bust John Stossel's balls, essentially. And Stossel says he talked to the Iron Sheik, and then David Schultz came up. And then Eddie Mansfield claims that he told ABC, if you're going to talk to anybody in the WWF, don't talk to David Schultz because he's crazy or whatever, blah, 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 blah. So is it Is that what happened? Did Eddie Mansfield and not Vince McMahon set all this whole thing up? That, you know, maybe Stossel saw an opportunity to say, hey, this is the guy they don't want us talking about. So maybe this is the guy we should be talking to. Because that's the kind of thing a muckraker would do, right? If you tell me, if I'm a muckraking investigative reporter, and you say, hey, don't talk to this guy, you know, he's a bit of a loose cannon. Who knows what might happen? That's really the first guy I want to talk to. That's not the guy I'm going to avoid. You know, like, you know, if the guy didn't want to talk, he would avoid me, right? But the idea that Vince McMahon put David Schultz up to this, I just don't buy it. But Stossel says that, okay, so another fallout was the Stossel in the Dark Side of the Ring said that his ears were ringing after the slap. He doesn't say which one. He says that during the lawsuit, he got sent to a WWF doctor. And then he says that the WWF doctor, or, you know, the doctors for the defense, which was not David Schultz, it was the WWF, he sued Vince McMahon. And he said that the doctor told him that his injuries were psychosomatic or something like that, neurosomatic, that he was holding on to an injury because he was involved with a lawsuit. He then immediately says, maybe there is some truth to, and he said he was offended by this, and he stormed out of the doctor, you know, because, you know, there was ringing in his ears and blah, blah, blah. David Schultz also said he didn't slap him in the ears, but then again, it doesn't matter. If you do any type of damage to the head, you have no idea what the hell can happen to the guy. But he then said that the ringing stopped after he got paid, which made my respect for John Stossel plummet. You know, like, that is absolute bullshit. And that kind of says that you were fishing for a lawsuit. So yeah, I think he was fishing for a lawsuit, and he searched out Schultz maybe and kind of egged this whole thing on, because Schultz was kind of being he was in character, you know, and he was being intimidating, and he was talking like a guy who was in character. Stossel should have left, you know, and you kind of have to ask the question that if he did talk to other people before Schultz, did he say the same thing to them? They didn't show that he talked to other people, because you know you have to edit this information, because this is a documentary. It's a segment for a TV show. That means they filmed, who knows, 8 hours of of footage just to get an 11-minute segment on the show. Okay, so who knows who he talked to, and he probably picked out his own targets, because, you know, Vince McMahon probably told the locker room, hey, if the guy comes up to you, bust his balls, be in character, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, there's so many guys, there's bound to be somebody who's going to give you something that you can work with.
Oh, John, I'd heard that this happened to you, and not until I saw it did I realize the impact of this. I hope nobody thinks that this was part of your story. You really were beaten by this man.
Yes.
I know that it's been difficult for you emotionally just to watch it. How is it physically? What did he do after he?
It just makes me mad. I mean, he hit me right on each ear. Doctor now says I have ear damage that's probably permanent. My ears hurt when there are loud sounds. Every time a bus goes by or people talk loudly, it hurts.
You said violence can bring about violence. Is this the result of something like this?
I mean, this guy is an exception. Most of these wrestlers are hardworking guys who know it's an act and keep it to the act. But
you must have been absolutely stunned in more ways than one.
I just couldn't believe it. I make a living confronting crooks and people who are fakers, and the one time I get hit is confronting someone where it's obvious that it's fake.
And where he kept saying to you, is that all you want to know? Is that all you want to know? What about Eddie Mansfield, who admits that it's fake? There's sort of a wrestler's code that you never do this, and he did it.
He was unusual. We've looked for someone who would talk about it for years, and none of these people would talk. He talks and has lost his job because of it, because he's mad. He feels these wrestlers work hard and get very little from these promoters.
It is an amazing piece that started.
Okay, so we went through this. There's little more to it. There's a lot more to the documentary other than this, you know, this situation, but this was the bulk of. This is why everybody wanted to watch the show. Right, because everybody wanted to know what happened. It made David Schultz smack John Stossel, you know, and now we know. You know, John Stossel was being John Stossel. And, and it really offends me that he kind of gets all Puritan on it with the violence begets violence. Because you just told me that the punching is not real. So if you want to say that wrestling is fake and that it's violence and begetting violence, then you want to ban movies? Because 1984, oh shit, The Godfather had been coming out by then. I think Scarface might have been a couple of years off or came out around this time. You also had, untold numbers of Hollywood gangster movies of, people getting shot up and all these sorts of things in movies. So you kind of have to ask the question: did this puritanical idea of violence begets violence, man? Did he have this towards everything? So there's a lot more to talk about. We're going to talk about David Schultz a little bit later. We're going to go into how he ended up in the business and what ended up getting him fired from the WWF, because that's not involved with this documentary at all. So hope you guys enjoyed this segment. Okay, so let's continue going through the Dark Side of the Ring documentary. So they talked about David Schultz being trained by Herb Welch in the early 70s, early to mid 70s. And this is important because Herb Welch is supposedly this really old guy, and in the old way, kind of like Vern Gagne and all of those guys, he just kind of drilled kayfabe. And he didn't even teach David Schultz that it wasn't real until after he had done his training. But the interesting thing to me is that Cornette talks about Herb Welch shitting in a bucket, smearing his armpits in shit, and then wrestling guys and hooking guys in like face locks and shit with shit under his armpits. And it was like, look, man, come on, bro. That's some of the grossest, most disgusting. That shit had me green faced. Like, I was really ready to puke after hearing that shit. And look, that has fuck all to do with wrestling. Okay, I don't see how smearing your own shit on you, that's fucking mental illness. That you end up in a paddy wagon in a padded room for that kind of shit. But Herb Welch, trained David Schultz and taught him to be a tough guy. And Schultz was a tough guy already, and he was really stiff with guys then. But the interesting thing to me is that the next subject is they talked a lot about Schultz and Hulk Hogan. And so apparently Schultz and Hogan kind of came up together. They met each other in Memphis. And they used to be roommates, or rather Hogan used to live with David Schultz. And of course, in 1983, Hogan is brought to the WWF. And then Hogan specifically asks Vince to bring Schultz in to feud with him. And that, there was this plan to have Schultz be the top heel, I guess in the Roddy Piper spot. And that the spot that Roddy Piper would get. And as much as I love Schultz, I mean, come on, he ain't got shit on Piper, except size. He's bigger than Piper, so he probably could have gave Hogan a real match. But Piper has just had that amazing personality. But Vince tried to really get him over, and he made him a real unlikable guy. And they showed the clips of David Schultz with guns and being like a domestic abuser. It was like really great stuff to make David Schultz the most despicable human being ever born. Not just a heel, but one of the most horrible people ever created. And it was really good. It was really good stuff. He's shooting guns, and Vince McMahon's reaction to the gun going off was great. Like, that was really great stuff. And of course, David Schultz says, like, people were calling the cops. People thought wrestling was real. Makes sense. They started calling the cops and saying that, there was guns, and he was about to get arrested for domestic violence and child abuse. And Vince had to tell the cops that it's just a show, that it wasn't his real family. It's not real. So it makes sense now that why Vince just said, fuck it, it's not real, guys. Because you got people continuously calling the police every time somebody does something silly on TV. And I remember that when they said when Rey Mysterio got thrown into that the side of that production truck in WCW, that there were people calling the police. And of course we know that I don't understand why folks watch wrestling and call the cops. Like, why would you do that? Why would you, even if it's just a show, why would you ruin the show? Okay, but apparently this didn't happen. Schultz kind of fucked up his big push. Vince McMahon brings in Mr. T, and this is the odd thing, because this kind of ties into the Stossel situation. It's because you have another guy who is outside the business. This time is Mr. T, who is an actor, who was being brought into the locker room, just like John Stossel, right? You had a non-wrestler brought into the locker room. These guys are kind of upset that Mr. T is being paid so much money because he's an actor to get involved in wrestling. He's probably getting paid a lot more than they are, which is likely true. But he's already a celebrity. That's just, supply and demand. So Schultz apparently is really upset about this, and he claims that he was just sort of talking to Mr. T. But people thought that he was going to do something to Mr. T, that he was going to harass Mr. T or bother him in some way, and that this led to him getting fired. So Chief J Strongbow, who was, I guess, the agent or producer at the WWF at the time, kind of told Schultz to back off and leave Mr. T alone, and that he was going to fire him if he didn't leave Mr. T alone. And he said, well, I guess you're going to have to fire me then. So Chief J Strongbow fired him. Then apparently they decided they was going to get all this hashed out. They called some lawyers, and of course Jay Strongbow can send a guy home, but Vince is the only one who can fire you. And Vince then confirmed that David Schultz was fired, and people are now saying that it wasn't the slap that got him fired from the WWF. It was him fucking with Mr. T that got him fired from the WWF. And we're not sure what the situation with him and Mr. T was. Okay, Schultz claims that it was just him routinely talking to Mr. T, maybe trying to intimidate Mr. T or something to that effect, that Jay Strongbow found was a problem because, Mr. T is an actor. You're fucking up WrestleMania if you fuck with Mr. T, right? So you're fucking with the big payday if you're fucking with Mr. T, and David Schultz was fucking with Mr. T, so he had to go. And that makes all the fucking sense in the world. But that also kind of attacks his credibility on some Vince told me to go after John Stossel, because it's like, why Stossel and not Mr. T? Like, what difference did it make? I mean, but it makes perfect sense if you don't like people who are non-wrestlers coming into the locker room. Because there's more than, he wasn't the only one. Schultz wasn't the only one. Roddy Piper didn't like it either. That's why he threw that goddamn stool at Mr. T at WrestleMania 2. That's why he threw that stool at him at WrestleMania 2. But Hulk Hogan and the Stone Cold Steve Austin show, I can't believe they played this clip, because everybody knows Hulk Hogan's a fucking liar. Everybody knows this. But they played this video, this sound clip of Hogan talking about that Schultz smacked Mr. T. And this is what Hogan says. Hogan says that after Schultz smacked Mr. T, he was done with him. And Vince McMahon was done with him. And this kind of put a dent into their... Well, I don't know if Schultz ever even heard about this, but Schultz said that him and Hogan weren't friends anymore. That they used to be friends, and that he had like plenty of pictures of them two guys together, and it was really sad. Like, legitimately, when you come up with somebody, and it seems like Schultz kind of was okay with, how things turned out, that he really didn't blame those things on Hogan. But, he said that Hogan changed when he went to the WWF. And I could see a guy who, when he didn't have anything, he's one way. And when he's now on the top of the world, he's a completely different person. Maybe he's on an ego trip. And I can get that, man. I get that. That fucking sucks. Because you think that, maybe he could have went to bat for him. Which makes me think that maybe Schultz did a little bit more than just, quote unquote, talk to Mr. T. Maybe he didn't hit him. But maybe it was something else. And then maybe even Hogan was like, look, you fucking with the money. We got to let you go. So then Schultz claims that after he got fired, that Vince McMahon kind of blackballed him, even though he says that he was still working in other promotions. But Vince kind of blackballed him. But we also don't know that. I mean, it's easy for people to, like, that blackballing thing that people throw around. That's another way of escaping responsibility for the things that you did, or your lack of talent. Like, we can't say David Schultz didn't have talent, but once you're on TV as being the guy who slapped John Stossel and cost Vince McMahon $400,000 or $300,000, however much it was, and you've been banned by an athletic commission, and then you only went away because Mr. Man paid for it. There have been other interviewers where Schultz have talked about the WWF paying for various other fines of him knocking over photographers and fans and all type of stuff. So this wasn't like the first time. He had like a routine problem of getting into it with people. As a matter of fact, I want to read something. I want to read something to you that kind of proves this point. Give me 1 second. So there was a question and answer segment done with Eddie Mansfield and Dr. David Schultz for PW Insider and Mike Johnson, and this is where I get my this is where I got some of my information from. So we're gonna do. I'm not gonna. This thing is absurdly long. Okay, so we're gonna read just the parts that I've already talked about. So some of the things that we discussed, that we're just going to go through it, and we're going to see. Here's what Mansfield had to say. The 2020 piece was discussed. Mansfield said that when you take food off someone's table, how can you expect them to not react? Schultz said that when he was involved in the incident on 2020, he had no idea that Mansfield was even involved in that piece. Mansfield said that he had a deal with Ole Anderson, who was the booker in Georgia, and Ole was a no-good son of a bitch. He said that Ole tried to screw him and blackball him, which is why he did the 2020 piece. Okay, nothing to do with the boys, right? It's personal between him and Ole Anderson. Okay, Mansfield said that other promoters, including the original Sheik, warned him. He said that Ole is in a wheelchair now, and God gets even. So I don't know how old this. Well, this is from 2011. Okay. So this is from 2011. Mansfield said that he warned 2020 not to interview Schultz because Vince McMahon was trying to get rid of him and would set up Schultz. Of course, this makes no fucking sense. Mansfield said that the only reason that the NWA doesn't exist today, in 2011, by the way, is because they were a band of thieves who didn't want to pay the wrestlers what they deserved, and Vince McMahon did. He said that if the NWA had stuck together and paid the wrestlers, it would still exist today. Mansfield said that he never had an issue with Vince McMahon and was screwed by the 2020 producers. Mansfield said that he told them to interview Ole Anderson because he was the one Mansfield had an issue with, but Ole sent them to the WWF. So, I mean, come on. It's there, black and white, clear as fucking crystal. And the words of Ole Anderson never came up at all in this goddamn documentary. And this is really crazy, you know. Like this is insane, and this video is going to be like bits and pieces of all kinds of shit. Here's another piece of the interview. They were asked about how they felt after watching 2020 and whether they regretted it. Mansfield said that he was upset he was screwed because it should have been a story about Ole Anderson, but he was happy for Schultz as it made his legacy forever. Mansfield said that Ole conned ABC into going after the WWF instead of trying to show that what the NWA was really about. He said that the NWA didn't have the foresight that Vince McMahon did, since they were too concerned about stealing money from the boys. Schultz said that he had no regrets and he should have hit Stossel harder. He said that Vince McMahon was a pile of shit and hopes to meet Vince in a dark alley. And I promise you, me and Vince McMahon will talk. Mansfield said that he doesn't like Vince personally, but can respect what he did for the business and that he paid the boys. Okay, so, and you know, this is the stuff that, you know, again, the Dark Side of the Ring did not do all of their research. They just kind of went with the parts of the situation that they wanted to, which is what they do. I mean, they don't have time to do infinite amounts of research, but it should have been clear from the beginning, because even if Ole Anderson didn't want to get involved, that it should have been made clear that the problem was not with Vince McMahon, it was with Ole Anderson. It should have just been made clear from the beginning that, you know, these types of things need to be said. You know, it's really unfair. You know, and the crazy thing is, people don't mind. You know, I'm pretty sure Vince doesn't give a shit, but it's pretty silly. Mansfield was asked about the red turns to green line in the 2020 and said that they sold him a bill of goods. He said that he was forced into doing it. Mansfield said that he didn't get paid for the appearance. What? Wait a minute. You said that wrestlers are slaves and then you go expose the business for free? Either you are dumb, the dumbest motherfucker in the world, or this is not true. Okay, he said Mansfield said he wanted to get over the story that guys weren't getting paid what they deserved, and he gave up his career to try and make things better for the boys. He said he put his life on the line for the business that he loved. He said that Vince and David never should have been involved. Mansfield said that he never watched the episode, but knows that it was the highest rated episode of 2020. This is insane, man. And Mansfield said that Roy Shire, Dory Funk, and Jim Barnett. I think Jim Barnett is the gay one. No, is it Jim Barnett? I said Nick Goulas in that other video, in the other part of this video, but I'm thinking it's Jim Barnett. It's one of these old guys, man. I'm sorry to both of these guys if it's neither one of them. It might have been neither one of them. All these old territory promoters, they run together to me. Mansfield said that Roy Shire, Dory Funk, Jim Barnett, and others called him to tell him that Ole was trying to screw him. He ripped on Ole again. Mansfield was asked if he could separate the personal and professional opinions on Ole. He was asked how anyone would feel if their career was over after over a decade because Ole and Fat Fred Ward and others decided they didn't like him. He said that when someone is malicious and costs you a living, and he wasn't the first guy it happened to, you have to say that's enough. He said that he learned from David Schultz not to take crap from anyone. This is interesting because David Schultz basically talked shit about Mansfield in the Dark Side of the Ring. He called him a wimp or something like that. He said he learned from David Schultz not to take crap from anyone, and those lessons are why he runs a multi-billion-dollar business today. He said that if there was anyone who didn't expect to get paid for their hard day's work. And okay, here's another interesting thing. A fan brought up, I guess this was moderated as some type of an event. A fan brought up that Honky Tonk Man had once said that Schultz had suggested a WrestleMania show and name. He said that the name was a play off the Hulkamania name, and he suggested it to Vince. He said that then he was set up in the 2020 incident and was sent to Japan when the first show was taking place. Of course, this runs contrary to the legend that the Fink, Howard Finkel, is the one who came up with the name WrestleMania. So we're talking about some contradictions here, right? So these things are, I don't know how much more of this stuff I can really read, man. It's just so much. Here's another thing. They were asked about drug issues in the business. Schultz said that Hulk Hogan supplied everyone with cocaine, marijuana, and steroids. Schultz said that they tried to call him into the steroid distribution trial, but could never find him and to issue the subpoena. He said that he didn't want to get on the stand because he knew that he would try to turn it around on him. He joked that he released his dog on the process server. Mansfield said that they weren't druggies, that they were up here, and one day Hulk Hogan would have to deal with what he's done. He said that he wouldn't change a thing except making 2020 about Ole. Okay, so then they start talking about the bounty hunter stuff. The bounty hunter stuff is cool, but I don't care about it. So here's another thing about Hulk Hogan and David Schultz, which I want to talk about. Schultz was asked why Hulk Hogan wanted him out of the WWF. Schultz said that he didn't know why Hogan might have wanted him gone, but Vince wanted him gone. He had been too hard on Steve Lombardi in a match in Poughkeepsie. Lombardi complained, and Vince said that he needed to lighten up on the boys because they were all scared of him. He told Schultz that he wasn't scared, and Schultz warned him that he shouldn't be. Schultz said that he was asked about the issue with Mr. T. He said that he threw Mr. T out of a locker room because he wasn't a wrestler, and then challenged him to get in the ring so he can shine his shoes. That's almost racial. Almost. The Los Angeles police handcuffed him and put guns to his head. He said that was Chief Jay Strongbow's fault. Okay, so this is a very different situation, right? He says here in this piece that he threw Mr. T out of the dressing room. He did not say that in the Dark Side of the Ring. He said he was talking to Mr. T outside of the dressing room. He didn't say he threw him out, right? Now, there was they played they talked about the Hulk Hogan spot where Hulk Hogan, they played this video of or this sound clip of Hulk Hogan talking to Steve Austin. And Hulk Hogan claimed that Mr. T was slapped by David Schultz, and because Mr. T was going to be involved with WrestleMania, that he was one of the big drawing points of WrestleMania, that David Schultz had just pretty much burned a bridge. But this is the thing, like, this is pretty crazy, right? Here's another thing. Schultz said that any reports that he wrote an apology to Stossel were untrue. He was asked what was in his mind when he slapped him. Schultz said that he wasn't angry, but was doing what Vince McMahon told him to do, or Vince McMahon asked him to do. Schultz was asked why he thought Vince McMahon wanted to get rid of him. Schultz said that he did his job and what he was supposed to do, but he wasn't going to kiss people's asses and handle the other wrestlers with kid gloves. He said that when he was in the ring with Bruiser Brody, he kicked the hell out of you and expected it back. Most of the others weren't crying to mama when they got roughed up, and Schultz must have roughed up his favorites. Mansfield put over Brody and Schultz for their working style. He said that there were similarities in their attitude. He said Brody was a man's man, and so was Schultz. So in other words, Schultz was too stiff with performers, especially probably Hulk Hogan, because we know how that doesn't work for me, brother. And that cost him his job, essentially. That and the whole Mr. T thing and the Stossel thing, it's just shit stacked on top of each other. So you're probably not going to hear anything about this when people discuss this subject. They're not going to look at all of the contradictions and all of these different things, which is what I try to do. I try to look up and pay attention to anything that people might have said. But that was pretty much the bulk of this PW Insider Q&A. I'm going to post this as well. It's via 411 Mania, which I have no idea what the fuck that is, but I have no reason to believe that this is bullshit. So let's continue. This video was longer than I expected it to be, so let's do a very quick wrap up. So we went through this video. We've seen that there's a lot of contradiction going on here. David Schultz nonsensically says that Vince McMahon wanted him to slap John Stossel, but that would be crazy because that would mean Vince McMahon wanted David Schultz to go to jail or to have to pay that lawsuit. None of that makes any sense. And then if you are a man with any good common sense anyway, you would know that there will be consequences for putting your hands on somebody. That makes no sense. Eddie Mansfield was upset at the NWA and Ole Anderson, not the WWF. It had nothing to do with the boys. It had everything to do with him essentially not being able to get work and not being able to get paid, not getting paid the way he wanted to. So he decided to basically expose the business and hurt the boys and try to hurt the boys in their career. He's a piece of shit. Look, David Schultz was aggravated. I won't say he's a piece of shit. He seemed like a straight up guy. But Stossel aggravated him. Stossel is a piece of shit though, because it sounds like he went fishing for an argument, because that's what he does. So he looked like an asshole in the dark side of the ring, and reading ancillary pieces, it also sounds like he was just a dickhole at this particular time. And Schultz wanted to sit down and kind of hash things out, and Stossel still holds a grudge, and this shit was almost 40 years ago. Like, you got smacked by a guy twice 40 years ago. You got paid. You could at least let the guy apologize and sit down and talk about it. But who knows? That might have been a setup too. So that's it. This has been a very long presentation. This has been the longest presentation I've ever done. I appreciate anybody who made it to this point. Like this video, please. Share it, or at least tell people about it. I did botch the video. I was going to watch it, but the screen capture didn't catch. So I was not able to watch the video along with you guys, but I will put the original video, or the video that I've seen, the 2020 documentary. It will be in the description. It will the Q&A will also be in the description. And I'll catch you all later. And thank you all for sitting back listening to me ramble for over an hour about a subject I did not know about. Until very recently, when I saw that this was coming up, I decided to start doing research, because I didn't know what they was going to put in it, and now I'm glad that I did, because there's so much missing. All right, so thanks you guys. Talk to you guys later. Peace. I know I stole that from Comics Explained.